Hello everyone, my name is Alex. I'm a 2000 rated over-the-board chess player, and in this series we were going from 1000 to 2000 ELO in chess.com rapid games. Now we are above 2000 ELO and kind of just seeing how far we can go with it. And I'll be explaining my thought process as best as I possibly can for your education and entertainment. Today we have d4 c6 and my opponent goes pawn c4. We'll be playing the Slav Defense. If you've seen some of my previous Caro Kann videos and previous speedrun episodes, you'll know I like to start with pawn c6. One, because I can meet bishop to f4, the London system, with queen to b6, which is a really good line for black. And two, I also invite my opponent to play e4 and go into a Caro Kann. But my opponent insists on c4, so we have a Slav defense. I really like the Slav for a few reasons. Firstly, I think it's quite solid. I don't really, well, honestly, I don't really know any Slav theory. I kind of just play it and I learn as I go, which I think is quite a holistic way of learning your openings, right? You guys, if you've been around my channel, you know I'm not a fan of just memorization for everything. Secondly, I think the Slav can be very kind of aggressive if you play it in certain ways, which can be quite fun as well. My opponent spends about a minute and goes e3, which it is a line, but I think we can just continue with knight to f6. One of the big questions will be, do we develop the bishop, or do we play e6 and go for more of a semi-slav structure? The main issue, potential issue, with bishop to f5 is queen to b3, and white basically goes, okay, you're no longer watching your b7 pawn, so I'm just going to attack it, right? And also apply pressure to d5. You can also find yourself having potential problems after like bishop f5, queen b3. Let's say you play like queen d7. White can maybe take and play for like a knight b5 or bishop to b5 idea, which can be kind of annoying. And I honestly don't know the theory in those lines, to be totally honest. Maybe I should, but I don't. And I don't really want to have to learn it all, to be honest. So I think what I'll do is I'll go knight bd7. And one of the ways that I like to play in the Slav is voluntarily playing a quick e6 and going into a semi-Slav. And this is one of the main lines of the semi-Slav, actually, that we've transposed to. There are lines where you take as well. And say, okay, you've moved your bishop once, and now I'm going to take, and you're going to have to move it again. If you've watched some of my previous videos where I've played the Panov from the white side, sorry, I'm just wiping my camera real quick. You'll know the same kind of concept exists in many different openings, where white moves the bishop, then black takes on c4, and then the bishop has to move for a second time, and technically it wastes time. Now, there are ideas where you take, and go b5, with the idea of going bishop b7, something like a6 and c5 to break in the center. And we can definitely consider that. But I think for the time being, I'm just going to go bishop d6. And this is kind of like a London structure, except my bishop isn't out on the f5 square. Again, I find the queen to b3 after bishop to f5 lines very uncomfortable to play with from the black side. So I tend to just try to avoid them. And then we'll castle. We might end up taking and going for the b5 plan. There are also ideas of b6, bishop b7, and then c5. Because one of the main things in the semi-Slav with this pawn structure, right, against white's d4, c4, is that the light squared bishop kind of sucks. Like, that's pretty clear. It has no way to get into the game because there's too many pawns and pieces in the way. And the way that you tend to go about fixing that problem is either bringing the bishop out like this, or even to a6 sometimes, or playing e5 to open up this diagonal, although my opponent has played h3, so there will be no bishop to g4 ideas in the future. You can also take and play e5 in some lines, which looks kind of appealing, actually. Take, e5. If take, and we get a queen trade, I think that line probably favors black because white's dart squared bishop sucks. And you can't go b3 because your knight hangs. So that's a very promising line. If take e5 and d5, that's something we ought to consider. If we push e4, there's some interesting lines, including like, well, not even e4 first, but knight to b6 hitting the bishop. I think that sounds good. Let's take. We can also consider the move b5. And like I say, I'm in a delayed manner employing the idea of making the bishop waste time, right? Obviously, it's been a couple moves since my opponent went bishop d3, but the same concept still applies. I think I like e5. c5 is also a move. e5, however, is kind of threatening e4, which white doesn't really want to allow. b5 is also an idea. And if like bishop to b3, bishop to b7, we can build up for c5. I think I like this. Let's go e5. And the trade, I think, should benefit us because also by forcing this bishop to the c4 square, if, let's say, our knight would take on e5, or even if it were to go to b6 to hit the bishop, we not only have e6 for the bishop to go to, but also f5. And the light squared bishop for white can't monitor both of those diagonals at the same time. So by taking on c4 and playing e5, I'm trying to fix the problem of my light squared bishop. And it hasn't really taken that long. Now, my opponent won't necessarily go into the lines that I want. He may play something like e4. That wouldn't be ridiculous. And maybe we take on d4. And I mean, you could see there how we could be forming some kind of attack in the future, though. That could be quite interesting. Like I said, depending on the way that you play in the Slav, it can be quite an aggressive opening. And traditionally, it is considered to be more of an aggressive opening, actually. Okay, my opponent does take, which kind of surprises me. So let's take back with the knight. I think he might go for the knight trade on e5, because his bishop's also under attack. A move like bishop to e2 seems incredibly passive. We can just go bishop to f5 or bishop to e6 or even queen c7, and we're in pretty good stead. Also, our pawn on c6 is a really good asset here, because whilst we don't have any center pawns and white has one center pawn, I would say the e3 pawn is actually a liability, because it's blocking in his dark squared bishop, which clearly wants to come to the g5 square. That's obviously where it would like to go. And maybe my opponent will play e4, not right now, because that hangs a bishop, but at some point to try and liberate his dark squared bishop, which is why all the way back on move 3, e3, it's a move, but it's not a very ambitious move. I don't think it's very ambitious anyway. I know there's lines in that system, and I think sometimes the bishop comes out to b2 in some of those lines. Sometimes white delays the move e4 and then gets the bishop out. But the way this game has gone, I'm not going to say we're better. I don't know if we are or not. However, I think we have a very comfortable looking position. Okay, bishop to b3. So white just sidesteps my knight's attack, and he offers a trade on f3, which I don't think I want to allow. Rook to e8 is a very natural-looking move. We do have to consider knight to g5 there, trying to exploit the f7 square, because my rook no longer defends it. However, if rook e8, knight g5, we could just go h6, because our knight is defending f7. Alternatively, we could play a move like bishop to f5, just developing the bishop, and also allowing this rook to take the queen if a queen trade happens. The more I'm looking at that, the more I really like that move. Just getting our bishop out, and also we're clamping down, for the time being, on the e4 square, right? Ideally, I don't want white to be able to play e4 and get his dark squared bishop out, because if e4 happens, there is a very good chance I will have to play h6 to stop bishop to g5, which it does look like a bit of a problem. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, please drop a like and subscribe if you haven't already. At the time of recording, we're almost at 10,000 subscribers, which is absolutely nuts, by the way. The support on the channel recently has been insane, so I hope you guys are enjoying this video just as much as my other videos. And okay, what else can we do in this position? I mean, queen c7 is definitely a move, or even queen e7, right? Just getting off of the d file. Reason being that the rooks clearly belong on d8 and e8. e8 to monitor e4, and d8 because it's the only open file on the board. The c file is a semi-open file, the e file is a semi-open file, the d file is a fully open file, and the queen is on the other side of it. We're also taking away the c2 square from the queen, which is potentially useful. And if my opponent plays bishop c2 offering a bishop trade, of course we can take and then take on f3, ruining the pawn structure. And that looks like an incredibly scary position for white to play. Maybe he can justify it with like king h1, rook to g1, but with the strength of my bishop cutting off this diagonal, that does not look very fun whatsoever. h3 might become really hard to defend. Like, I can probably just play a move like queen c8 in some of those lines, and because you don't have king to h2, you might have to go king g2, which is not where the king wants to be. So, like I've been saying, the Slav can be a very aggressive system, and of course it depends on how my opponent plays it. One of the other reasons I like bishop to f5, by the way, is it kind of prepares rook to e8, and you might be asking how that can prepare rook e8, because my initial issue with bishop to f5, sorry, with rook to e8, let me go back, was that knight g5, not immediately, because currently my knight's defending, but f7 is a little bit uncomfortable to defend, right? With my bishop on f5, I have the option of dropping back to g6 to defend, so my rook does not have to. Knight h4 from my opponent, okay. Harassing my bishop, interesting. Bishop to d3 is a very interesting move, by the way. Just attacking the rook, supported by the knight. Bishop to d3, rook to e1 has to be played. Knight to e4, hitting the knight, because my queen is now hitting the knight, and offering a knight trade. If knight takes, bishop takes, the knight's still under attack. If the knight comes to f3, then I can take it, and because my bishop's monitoring f3, the queen can't take. I know that was incredibly complicated, so it might have been difficult to follow, but that looks like a very nice line. Bishop d3 feels like the right move as well. It just feels correct. Also, even if let's say my knight was somewhere else right now, like for example, on rook to e1, I can consider a move like knight to c4, and you might be asking, well, you're just hanging your bishop, but no, because if rook e1, knight c4, queen d3, I have bishop to h2 check. I did see this move. I thought I could take. Obviously, well, now if I move my knight, then you can take, because there's no bishop to h2, because f4 is in the way. It's an interesting resource from my opponent. Also, I can't really play a move like knight e4, because after take, I have no attack just yet. It's a bit too slow. But f4 is a very weakening move. What else could we do? Well, okay. Obviously, taking on f1 is the first line we should consider. If my opponent takes back, then we move the knight and we're completely winning. The line we need to consider is rook f1 and f takes e5. And I have 3 pieces that are hanging in that line. If I go for bishop takes, queen d8, rook d8, king f1, the material is technically equal. I have a rook and a pawn for 2 minor pieces, and white's pawn structure is a bit weird. There's actually some decent lines there, like bishop c3, pawn c3, knight e4, applying a ton of pressure to the white position. This isn't all that bad, actually. Do I have other options, though? There is knight g6, which is an interesting idea. The point being, if queen d3, I have knight takes h4. Right? If knight g6 and knight g6, I have bishop g6. Oh, I don't know why that's lagging. Come on, this is a crucial moment. Knight g6, bishop g6, f5, bishop h5, g4. I'm not sure if my bishop gets trapped there. That's my only concern. Knight g6, bishop takes, f5. Ooh, I don't have take and bishop h2 winning the queen because the bishop defends the queen. That would have been a cool idea. Okay. Yeah, f5, bishop h5, g4. Can I do this? Knight g4, hg4, queen h4. And threaten mate on h2. If rook f2, I have bishop takes g4, attacking the queen. If queen e2, I still take, and I have two pawns for the piece, and a big attack. Although, actually, I think my bishop might hang. Oh no, my bishop on h2, on d6 is hanging. Knight g6, bishop g6, f5, bishop h5, g4. Knight takes, pawn takes. Here. Yeah, the queen can get back to help defend. So that doesn't work. Or can it? King h1, queen h3. There's no queen h2 because of queen f1. So king back to g1. I don't have queen g3 check because the queen covers that square. If I go rook d8... Yeah, I don't have anything. The queen just comes back to help defend. So that doesn't seem to work. Again, well, no, that just loses. Knight here, bishop here, f5. Do I have anything else in that position? Not sure. Bishop h5, g4. I don't want to just blindly trust my opponent here. What about knight e4? Opening up the attack on the knight. Knight e4, obviously fe5. Queen h4. Queen d3. I still don't have enough attack there. It's too slow. Just a bit too slow. This super interesting position. I feel like the computer will tell me I'm missing something. But I think I have to go ahead and take on f1. I can't find any other line. Yeah, if I had more time, I would love to delve into the position deeper, but I just don't have the time on the clock. Okay, so this is played as expected. Now, my initial line was take, which I think is actually playable after take, and knight to e4. But I want to check if there's anything else, namely involving this. Knight e4, that doesn't work. Knight d5, knight d5, queen h4, no, that doesn't work. I think I have to go for this. And theoretically, white should be better. Two pieces tends to be better than a rook and a pawn, which I think I've calculated correctly. Yeah, yeah. But I think this is actually quite playable for black. I think the better move might actually be taking with the queen. Although that's not actually that simple. After something like take and knight to e4, attacking this and opening up the attack on the knight, e3 is incredibly weak as well. Incredibly weak. The e-file could come in very handy. Although, of course, I'd have to watch out for f7. But there's a lot of life left in this position. If white takes, there's still a lot of life. If white takes on f1, there's a lot of life. Queen here. Do I have anything else? I'm not sure I want to trade off my bishop too quickly, because giving white the bishop pair could be very scary. Okay, he does take, which honestly I think makes my life easier, because I don't have to worry about being attacked so much. I don't have to take this. I could do something else. Not sure what, though. I could play a move like rook e8. I could even try and double up on the d-file, but I think this makes the most sense. The thing is, if take knight e4, c4 seems forced, which makes this bishop kind of suck. I think I should go for that. The computer might hate me for giving away the bishop pair. Kind of willingly. But I don't know. If I can win one more pawn, especially with dominating the open d-file, and also white, his pieces are a bit strangely placed. The bishop is great on b3, sure. But the rest of his pieces are placed very strangely. I don't think bishop b2 can be played because of rook d2, and that looks horrific for white. I think he's probably lost if he does that. He probably has to return the bishop back to c1, and then something like check and bringing the other rook in looks pretty nice. Something like that. So bishop b2 certainly can't be played, which makes me think that c4 is the only move. And then I have a couple of options. I mean, I could play c5 and try and lock the pawn in place. Bishop c2 seems to be the natural follow-up. Alternatively, on c4, I could play f5, supporting my knight. And maybe if a move like bishop c2, I can go g5 and try and chase the knight. Although, again, maybe it is better just to make the position more solid. I really do think c4 is the only move, though. I don't see any alternative. And fortunately for white, he's also covering the d1 square. If c4, what else can I do? I can consider rook d6. There is no bishop to a3 with a skewer, because I can throw in rook f6 check. And then after, like, king g1, rook d8. If rook d1 offering a trade. Take. Not sure about that position. Not sure. Okay, c4 is played. I think I have to try and double up. Rook d3 walks into bishop c2, and that's definitely not a good line. G5 makes no sense, because the knight just jumps into f5, and I can't boot the knight out anymore, because I can't play g6. This check doesn't seem to do anything. Yeah, it doesn't really do anything. Yeah, I think I like rook d6. Also baiting this because of rook to f6. Pinning the knight. And then I actually have like knight g3 checking ideas there too. I basically need to try and create as many problems for white as quickly as possible before he can develop his pieces properly. That's kind of the goal. The bishop could theoretically come to b2, but again, I think allowing rook d2 is very bad, because then I have a clear source of counterplay. which otherwise is maybe less obvious. Of course, white could say, oh, I've made you waste 2 moves, kind of like with the whole taking the pawn on c4 and the bishop going to d3 and then c4 in the opening, if you remember that. But I don't think this is quite the same situation, because gaining access to d2 is really good. And again, if bishop back to c1, we can probably give a check. Okay, the king moves over, so I think I should double up. Well, I have to double up, otherwise bishop to a3 is a problem. Because let's say I play a move like g6, stopping knight to f5, which I was considering. Then after like bishop to a3, I'd have to go c5 to block. And then if like bishop to c2, my knight is the piece defending c5, then I don't actually see how I defend that, because if my knight moves, then I lose c5. And if I defend c5, my knight hangs. So I think I essentially have to go for this. And on the bright side, my opponent's past 2 moves have been kind of shuffling pieces rather than activating the pieces that matter. You could also argue c4 makes this bishop not a great piece, which would be a fair argument. My king is also very safe, which is good. I know you could claim that it could be back ranked, but realistically, the only way that happens is if white gains control of the d file, which he now can't do, because we control the d1 square twice, and playing rook d1 can't happen now because I'd win a piece. So this is not so bad. This is not so bad. We have a lot of play here, and we can make this job very difficult for white. I mean, I think my ideal kind of pawn structure would be something like this, with pawns on b6 and c5. Ooh, giving me access to d2, really? Really? Bishop b4, rook f2. If this, then I'll happily trade and take on a2. That's fine with me, because then I'm up 2 pawns, and my a pawn is a big problem. c5, I think, just walks into bishop c2, and I won't be getting skewered, but I have the same problems as before. So rook d2 looks very good. Well, it looks like the only try. Maybe I'm walking into knight to f3, attacking my rook and getting the knight into the game, coming to d4 maybe. However, I have rook e2 there, hitting the e3 pawn. And again, it's unclear how white defends. Maybe rook e1 is forced. But then, I mean, there's a lot of tricks. I mean, I have rook d to d2 as an example. And if knight takes, then I can take here and win the knight. And I'm completely winning there. That's a nice tactic. Knight f3 here, here, here. If rook e2, then I will just take back with the rook, obviously. I don't have a choice there. But then e3 is incredibly weak and very difficult to defend. If you go bishop to c1, I don't have rook e1 check because the knight covers that. But I do have a lot of activity, and I push white's pieces back, which seems like a net positive. Okay, rook f1. Alright, my opponent goes after f7, preparing c5, probably. Fair enough. Fair enough. I could just go rook e2 and attack e3. Something like this is interesting. The knight is defending g2, though, so I'd have to go g5. I suppose the issue... Maybe I should go c5 and just block it. That seems natural. Because there's no bishop c2, because I control that. If c5, knight f3... I think I again just go rook e2, and it's the same idea as before. So c5 looks very natural. If c5 and rook to f4 attacking the knight. It's an interesting position. Because g5 is on the way in that line. I think it should work. Maybe knight to g3. That also threatens knight e2. I'm going to go c5. I don't think I have much of a choice, to be honest, because I can't let this bishop open up in tandem with the rook. I'm also trying to block off this bishop. If I can get b6 in, then I should be golden. Because I'm essentially taking his bishop pair out of the game for the time being. He may try to reroute to a square like f3, which would be a smart idea. But that would be at significant cost, at least for the time being. And also, it's just a complicated move, c5. Because I assume my opponent really wanted to play this. Also stops bishop to b4, hitting the rook, which is potentially useful. Again, rook c1, I think rook e2 probably has to be played, because I need to stay on the second rank. Okay, knight to f5. My opponent activates the knight. He's not really threatening anything, though. I think we can just do this. Check, king f8, knight d5. Maybe that's the idea. Still, though, that should be okay. Should be okay. Do we even have to go b6? Could we... I don't know. Play rook e2. Prepare to double up. Here, here, here. Yeah, decent line. I'm going to go b6. I don't really have time to be considering every single possibility right now. But I definitely do think the knight should go to d5. Because the knight is completely supported. And it also defends e3, which is obviously good for white. Yeah, he does go for it. I think I have rook d6, though. Which is a tricky move. Because I'm preparing rook g6. My opponent probably has knight to f4. Defending and hitting the rook. But I'm complicating matters by having this idea. I also just need to make sure I activate my rook. Again, bishop c1. Rook e2. The rook also can't come to f2 to offer a trade, which is useful. If rook d1 offering a trade, maybe I have to accept it. I'm not sure. But then, I don't know. There's some ideas of like knight to... Oh, no, not knight c3. Okay, he does go bishop c1, which... Okay, cool. If this is this... Oh, no, then I take on a2. So that's not a problem. If this and knight to f4, though, is my rook trapped? Is my rook trapped? That might be the issue. Okay. What about rook d3? Rook d3, bishop c2 is the issue. Okay. Here, here. I don't see a move. The best I can seem to do is knight g3. Here, here, knight g3. Knight takes. I just don't have enough there. That's concerning. I'm really running out of time as well. That's not good. Mm, no, I don't actually see any way out of this. I think knight f4 wins the game. And my rook just is caught behind enemy lines. Good find from my opponent. This is the best I can see. And I mean, I know I'm completely lost. I'm down a piece. Maybe there's still a little bit of play. I should probably play on a little bit just to see what I can conjure up. But I think particularly with my opponent having the bishop pair, it's not going to work, quite frankly. I suppose... No, I mean, even then, and rook to d2, king back. Maybe I have rook e2 there, winning the 3-pawn. Rook d1, take, rook d7. I can try and play the endgame, I suppose. I could keep the knight on the board, but that doesn't seem to help. I think I've got to go for this. Give the check. Oh, that's not a move I considered. That's a strong move. Okay. That's very annoying. A good find. If rook d1, probably rook b2. Trying to keep the rook just harassing loads of different things at the same time. It's a good move. Okay, let's push. Again, I'm just trying to create something. I'm kind of hoping to make him fall for this. Obviously, I pick up the bishop, and I'm completely winning there. I'm really interested to see what I could have done better earlier in the game. Maybe taking on c3 with the bishop was the fatal mistake. Okay. Where should I go? I think... Oh, no, I should have gone to d4 in one move. I should have kept rook to d3, check as an idea, rather than play it immediately. Okay, is what it is. King e2, rook g3. I could do this. Here, preparing this, though, is a problem. So I should probably swing the rook this way instead. Yeah, obviously he can't just keep repeating, because I'll obviously take a draw. That would be a miracle. Okay. Let's bring the king. My king gets to e5. It's actually quite good. And white's pawns are somewhat restricting his bishop. I have a4 in the back pocket if I need it to like draw the bishop away from the defense of the pawns. I don't want to play it just yet, though. I just want it there for the future. I mean, this game could actually have some life left in it. It's not quite dead and buried. Technically, I can't take this because of bishop to b3, so it's not actually a threat just yet. But again, like, where's the bishop going? I think e5 might be a very strong move. Opening the bishop up. Oh, he doesn't go for it, though. Well, now I go king e5. Your bishop's still under attack, and c4 is still under attack, and I don't see how you defend c4. I suppose if rook c4, you can win my f7 pawn. That's true. I could try and win the e4 pawn and get a rook trade. Not sure how winning that is. King d3 does look very good, though. Getting the c pawn rolling. Okay, he's preparing this. Take here. Probably actually go for this. This actually looks stronger. I'm somehow creating counterplay here, despite being down a piece. That's not a move I considered. Okay. If I do offer the rook trade, king e3 comes at the end of the line. Take, take. What about rook d4 hitting the bishop? I'm going to do it and just ask the question. Because it's a non-committal move. I give my opponent a chance to make a mistake. Also, I can play rook d6 to hold the b6 pawn in place, which might actually be a good option, because my rook now gains access to the d file. But I can defend without trading the rooks, which is a decent option. Although that will allow the king into e3. Okay. This looks really promising now. I'm not sure that's a good move. You defend e4, but now you have to deal with this pin. And as long as I keep my king on a dark square, that's actually really problematic. And I move my king into d4, and king c3 is a threat. If you take, the rook endgame should be winning for me. I have pressure on g2, pressure on both your pieces, pressure on the e4 pawn. My c pawn is a passed pawn, don't forget that. Don't forget that. I have no idea how we're clawing this back. No idea how, down a full piece. But yeah, this is kind of what I've recently started referring to as the Magnus mindset, like squeezing a position for everything it's got. Because obviously Magnus is known for like squeezing the water out of the stone, pulling wins out of nothing. Okay. Here. Here. I don't even have to trade, to be honest. I could just not trade. Also, this would blunder this, I think. I'm not sure. I don't think a rook trade benefits me. I can't figure it out with the time I've got. So I'm going to keep the rook on the board and hit the bishop. I couldn't figure out what happens after the rook trade. Okay. Maybe that was a bad move, but it feels like white is a little bit paralyzed. The bishop actually has no squares. I control every square. Oh, wait, no, am I just winning the bishop? I think I'm winning the bishop. Which I have to admit I didn't realize when I initially played rook c1. I just wanted to avoid a repetition. Because I felt like I could win this. Mostly because of how active my pieces are and how passive the white pieces are. And as we see, the white pawns, as I mentioned earlier, are restricting the bishop's movement. If the bishop could go to either of these squares, white's probably winning. Because the bishop just gets out, and then I can still apply pressure and try and push the c-pawn. Maybe I can force a draw. Maybe I can win. I don't know. White might be able to liquidate there, but yeah, I just win the bishop. And I don't see how white fights back. He also can't access either of the important files. Wow. I think this wins because I have rook to c3, forcing a trade of rooks. Yes. Oh my god. That is nuts. I have no idea how I've just swindled that. That's ridiculous. Now, obviously, I'm hitting this, and I'm preparing to escort the pawn. This game is as good as done. I'll just take the pawn. There's no reason not to. King c4. I'll give up the pawn. I don't care. And I'll push. And you can go try and win my pawns. That's not a problem. I will promote. Here. Is it better to go f6? f6, e6? No. Let's get the queen on the board. And I have queen g6 incoming. I don't know if I have to sack my queen for the pawn. I don't think so. I think I can maybe get my king in quickly enough. Give the check. No, I think this should be fine. Check here. Bring the king. Check. And then I think I can bring the king again. E7. Where's the win? Here, if that's winning. If here, king f8. Queen d6. King f7. Check. No, that should be fine. That should be fine. All of it should be winning, but I'm just trying to do it in the best way possible. So now I'm pinning the pawn to the king, so the king has to move. And now I force the king to e8, because if you go to g8, then I'll take the pawn. Yeah, okay, and after king e8, I have king d6. And it would be stalemate, except you have 2 pawns remaining. So you move one of the pawns, and then queen e7 will be checkmate. So my opponent resigns. What a game. I mean, I thought I had quite a good opening, and then I went for bishop d3, which I could not figure out the complications quick enough. My opponent obviously got the bishop pair for a rook and a pawn for the endgame, and then we just somehow clawed it back, which was pretty nuts. And hopefully, if my computer can load, we can have a look at the game review and see what it has to say. Okay, so 83.7 for my opponent, 89.1 for myself. Definitely a fair few blunders in there, but yeah, let's have a look at the analysis. It's going to be very interesting. All right, so let's get into it. Obviously, my opponent opens with d4. I play c6. Like I said, for 2 reasons. One, to meet bishop to f4 with queen to b6. I've dubbed this the Centurion system, and now I have to reload my tab. Thank you very much, chess.com. And basically the point is, kind of like how I was saying I don't like bishop to f5 because of queen to b3, we immediately try to punish bishop to f4 with queen to b6 going after b2. And you can't go queen c1 like you normally would because of queen d4. But my opponent goes c4, so we go into a Slav with d5. e3 is played, which is an odd move. Now, I obviously mentioned bishop to f5 is kind of the move, but queen b3 just sort of scares me in these lines, and maybe it shouldn't. But like queen c7, now you can't take because the bishop hangs. But even like these sorts of lines, I really don't like. I find them a little bit uncomfortable to play. Therefore, what's wrong with... Oh no, yeah, this then this. Okay, cool. So bishop d2 should probably be played, or knight c6. But anyway, I go knight f6, knight c3, knight bd7. Again, bishop to f5 probably can be played, but I find these types of positions uncomfortable. So, knight bd7, knight f3, and e6. And here we transpose into one of the main lines of the semi-slav. Bishop to d3. Again, you can take and play b5 immediately and go a6, prepare the move c5. The theory is kind of interesting here, and I honestly don't understand it all that well. Like, personally, this looks very complicated and maybe doesn't suit my playstyle all that well. However, you can see if you're an aggressive player how you might quite like this position. Like castles with the open f-file, the bishop coming to c5, queen c7, rook d8. It does look very attractive from an attacking perspective. But I go bishop d6, h3 from my opponent, which seemed a little bit slow. Computer wanted e4. After de4, knight e4, bishop to e4, I can castle, and white just has some space in the center, although I will play e5 and try to counteract that. But h3, I castle, my opponent castles, and now I take on c4, which is the best move. And after bishop c4, e5, we have quite a nice position. My opponent takes, which is not considered a good move. Better was either e4, which I think I mentioned, or queen c2, just sidestepping the d-file. And I don't really want to take, and white doesn't really want to take, so we could probably play some very tense chess. White might go for e4, something like take, knight e5, maybe bishop b3. And you can see why this is an interesting type of position. Black is most likely geared towards attacking the king side. White is very much focusing in the center. But okay, de5, knight e5. Here I was expecting to go for this. I thought white would go into this. And I thought that I had quite a nice position here, which the computer does agree with. I think better is to move the queen, though. And bishop c7 prepares queen d6. If rook d1, there is queen e7. And these bishops are just much better than these bishops, basically. But anyway, here, computer liked taking. And then bishop c7. And if rook d1, again, just queen e7. Interesting. Again, it really likes the setup of these bishops, which I played bishop to f5, though. It also liked rook e8, and it didn't care about knight g5 because we just go h6. I didn't like this. I think that was my issue, but to be fair, I could just, like, move the bishop, and a trade is probably fine anyway. If, like, rook d1, bishop f5, if take, I mean, this is pretty uncomfortable for white. Bishop f5 immediately, though. And the best move is knight d4, which is a move I saw, but I didn't think it was that big a deal. I thought, well, worst case scenario, I just retreat the bishop. However, there is this f4, f5 idea, which I did miss. If not for f4, f5, then black is doing quite well. But knight h4, which is also a good move, and I go bishop d3, which would be great. If rook e1 is played, then I do have knight to e4, which was one of the lines I was suggesting. And I was saying something like knight e4, bishop e4, knight f3 might be forced. And then I can take, force the doubling of the pawns, queen g5. Clearly, black is almost winning, like, with all of this going on. Let's say rook to d8 might be thrown in as well. Although that might not even be necessary. Computer doesn't care about this. Because, oh, knight f3 is mate, that's why. But anyway, my opponent finds the only move, f4, and loads of things are under attack. Now, fortunately, I found the only move, which is bishop f1. Now, I spent ages trying to consider knight to g6, and I was thinking, well, if queen here, then I can take here, and I have a chance now, right? Because material is equal. White has an aggressive-looking position, but maybe I can claim it's an overextension. However, I couldn't figure out what to do after takes f5, bishop to h5 and g4. I was trying to consider, like, taking and then playing queen to h4, but these plans just never worked because the king could just move, and I don't have, like, a follow-up here. I mean, king h2 is actually better. And if check, king g2, oh, and then queen g3, and my attack is over. basically the queen will come back at some point and I will have nothing. So therefore I took on f1, which is the only move, and white played the only move, taking on e5. Apparently I should have taken on g2, which I did consider. Why did I don't actually know why I rejected that. That's just a good desperado. If ef6, bishop h6, I'm actually up a pawn there. Obviously, this looks incredibly scary, and it is. But this is very playable. I don't know why I didn't consider that. I just took on e5. But okay. I'm also correct in saying queen f1 was the better move. But queen d8, rook a8, king f1. And yes, the computer likes taking on c3. It also likes rook fe8, which was the other move I considered. c5 is also a move, but not that good. So bishop c3, bc3, knight e4, which is the best move. And yeah, white really should play c4, which is what he does, because if bishop to b2, the computer already thinks it's equal after rook to... Not actually rook d2, but rook fe8. Huh. Interesting, okay. And if the trade is offered, then I'm actually winning after rook d8. Because if this... rook d2, and if this, then I take on b2. So c4, rook d6, which isn't the best move. Rook fe8 is better. I thought I had to take control of the d-file immediately. The computer disagreed. I thought bishop to a3 would be an inaccuracy because of rook to f6. However, the computer doesn't think, oh no, there's this in that line. Maybe I have to do this. But then white gets the d-file. Interesting. So the better idea would have been c5, and if bishop c2, rook a6. Okay, that's not a move I saw. That's a very strong move. And if this, then I just go rook to b8, and that actually looks pretty good. Like, this looks very drawable. But king g1, rook fd8. Here, white has one move that holds a decent advantage according to the engine, which is bishop c2. Just attacking the knight, which does make sense, and I don't have f5, of course. But my opponent chose bishop a3. Here, rook d2 is a mistake. Rook d3 is better. And if rook e1, then knight d2 is really strong. Because obviously this is the threat. And if rook c... Oh. I did not notice that. Yeah, I probably should have gone for that. But okay, that makes sense. Bishop a3, rook d2, rook f1. I went c5, which is a good move. My opponent went knight f5, which is also a good move. Here I went b6, trying to secure the position, but I could not figure out what to do. Rook here was the better move, stopping this. Or a5. Oh, okay, to set up these ideas. Which, yeah, that makes sense. And here, bishop c1 is the only move. And then like rook e2, and very complicated position. But anyway, b6. Knight e7. My opponent finds the maneuver that I was concerned about. Here, g5, the computer screams out for to stop knight to f4, which turned out to be a problem, right? I didn't see the threat, though. I didn't see the threat. I went rook to d6. And after bishop c1, rook e2, knight f4, my rook is just lost. So, I went knight g3, tried to get this position, which I thought after rook d2 is a little bit complicated. Obviously, white is completely winning, but he has to prove it. So, king f3, I bring my king, e4, a5, rook c2. Rook d3 check actually is better than my other choice. King e2, rook g3, which is the best move. If I come back here, then my opponent forces a rook trade. Oh no, I have rook e4. What am I on about? So after king e3... Well, he's still going to force a rook trade, though. So, okay. Rook g3 is better anyway, though. King f2, rook back to d3. Of course, I'm happy with a repetition. So my opponent has to find something else. He goes rook e2. I go king e6. And here e5 is the best move. But my opponent doesn't do it. He goes bishop c2. Rook c3. Again, e5 is the best move because he needs to liberate the bishop. We saw what happened because the bishop got stuck behind all its own pawns. But a4 and king e5 is the only move to try and fight now. Although white is up a bishop, the bishop isn't actually that good, and c4 is hanging. So bishop d1, I take on c4. I considered this, but then there's rook to c2, and I was concerned about this position. Although I do have king d4, which is admittedly pretty nice, and I have so many pawns on dark squares that the bishop can't touch them. But anyway, rook c4. I was expecting bishop to b3, but I thought that rook b4 was very strong. If this, then this, and I'm completely equal according to the engine, which makes sense. Bishop d5, and I'll start pushing. So rook b2, a good find. I go rook d4, which is the best move. Because rook b4, I didn't think worked after take. I thought that white went king e3, which is the only move, by the way. Anything else lets my king in. Or take the pawn. Let's say like bishop c2, I just march in and I'm winning. As you can see, this is a problem. White needs to prevent the black king from entering the position, and then I'm completely lost. White can just play a move like bishop to b3, set up a light squared blockade, and I just can't push the pawns, and white will slowly outmaneuver me. So, rook d4, hitting the bishop. Bishop c2, and now the computer wants rook b4, which I don't understand. Is it just that this comes with... Oh, the bishop doesn't monitor c4 in this line, so my pawns can march a bit further. But rook d2 check is still good. King f3 is a mistake. King e3, giving up g2 was the only try. And going king d3 to defend. And after check, king c4. Either I can go for a repetition, or I can maybe go rook g6 to defend. And to be honest, I think I'd rather have black in this position. But king f3 is a mistake, because again, I get the king into d4, and now there is trouble. And I'm already actually better. Again, e5 is the only move, trying to liberate the bishop. But my opponent moves his rook, and we go king c3, because king c3 is the threat. And he finds bishop to b1, which I thought was a really clever defensive resource, because I couldn't see how I win in this position, and the computer believes it's drawn after the only move f6 saving the pawn, which makes sense. But rook d1, hitting the bishop, is again the only move for black. Everything else draws or loses. Bishop c2, rook c1. Again, I didn't want to repeat the position, because I eventually have to find this rook c1 idea. Part of it was luck, in fairness, but I felt like it was winning, so I didn't want a repetition. And the bishop simply has no way out. So my opponent goes rook a3 check. I take e5, and then I was really happy with this king to b2 idea. The rook has to move somewhere on the third rank, which allows rook c3, and a trade is forced. So the king moves up, take, and then the game is pretty simple from here. My opponent did try to create counterplay, to be fair to him. But the problem is, the queen always stops the promotion. Worst case scenario, I can sack the queen for the pawn. But you can also maneuver in a way that allows you to bring your king in to help with the attack. Queen d6 is an important move, pinning the pawn. If king to e8, I can probably just push, or I can go like queen f6, and if king d8, king d6, and you're just losing the pawn and you can't promote, right? I'm coming at you from both angles. So king f7, we give the check, and my opponent resigns, because if king g8, then I can take, and your counterplay is gone. And if king to e8, then king d6 would be stalemate, except you have two... Oh no, you have king d8. What am I on about? Yeah, there's king d8, and then obviously check and mate. I hope you guys enjoyed this game. I felt like the opening went very well up until that tactical skirmish, which I came out second best. But I hope like this video is probably very useful in showing how you can fight back from a completely losing position. Which I was shocked that I was able to do that, to be fair. I did not deserve to win that game. But thank you very much for watching. If you want to see another video where I use the Slav Defense to very good effect, check out the video up here. And if you want to see the previous episodes of the speedrun, check out the playlist down here. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.